Hello, Double O crew. Today is a learning lesson. You will be my pupil, and I will be the teacher.
What are they learning? Oh God, I messed up the camera.
What are you doing? Anyway, class is starting now. Believe it or not, reading a stream can be pretty complicated. And today we're trout fishing, but this can be applied for any species that lives in a stream. It's definitely not just for trout. So to get started, pretty much the same as any other species. When you're fishing, you're looking for structure, places that the fish are going to hold. And there's a few key things to keep in mind when looking for the structure. You're gonna think log jams, rocks, any type of escape points. And a good way to remember it would be wood is good, rocks rock, foam is home. So foam is what's created in streams. I'll show you guys when we get up near the dam. In the turbulence, when the water kicks up, it creates big foam patches, and the trout and other species love to get up underneath of that because it's shelter, it's cover. Any type of wood or any other debris or structure in the water is always good. It provides a place to sit and hide. Rocks do the same thing. Obviously, big log jams like this are going to create a big, nice current break, a place for them to hide underneath of and get out of the view of birds of prey and other things, and still be able to dart out into the current and grab a bite to eat. So that's pretty much what you're looking for. Whether you want to call it an escape point, a holding point. If you're trout fishing, it's called a trout lie, even though it could just be called a holding point. But you know, for whatever reason, they decided to call it a trout lie instead of a trout holding point, because it's where the trout lay. It's where they lie. I don't know. Anyway, we're gonna go over some things here as far as reading the stream and picking apart individual pieces of the stream, as far as learning what they are, how they work, and why the trout sit in them and other species. Today I'm just going to keep saying trout because that's what we're fishing for, but again, this can be applied to any species. You want to find anything that is going to give you an escape point, which means the fish is escaping from the hard, fast moving water and sitting in a nice, calm, still spot, generally right on the edge. That way they can rest, they don't have to expend a lot of energy, and they can still dart out into the fast moving water and grab a bite to eat. It's also called a current break. I mean, there's a million different names for it. It's the same thing. So when you hear any of these terms, that's what we're talking about, is those holding points where the fish is escaping the fast moving water to save energy, and they're positioning themselves generally in a place where they have shelter, and in a place where they can dart in and out of cover quickly to feed. Which brings me to my next part of this. Before we get into picking apart the stream, you have something to think about. You have to think about the food versus energy equation. It's pretty self-explanatory, but you have to think about it logically, I guess. If you have a chance to, I don't know, have a McDonald's cheeseburger or a grade A, perfect, nice filet mignon steak, which one is worth going out into that current for? Are you going to jog a mile for that cheeseburger, or are you going to jog a mile for that steak if it's free? You know, you got a $50 piece of steak or a $1 cheeseburger. Which one are you going to jog a mile for? Which one are you more willing to expend the energy for? So you have to put it in perspective. If you drift a little tiny bug and it's not perfectly presented right in front of their face, they're going to be less willing to come out a foot or two into that current to grab that than as if you drift a big shiner, or, you know, something a little more worth their while to eat. And that's not just when you're drifting, that's just the actual bait that's coming down naturally. So it's the food versus energy. Is it going to be worth the risk and the energy of that fish darting out of its shelter and out of its safe spot and out of its calm, relaxing area to grab that food, or not? So, you know, that's not saying that they won't. It just depends on the conditions. But generally, if you present the fish with something a little more worthwhile, you don't have to worry as much about your presentation and getting that perfect right in front of their face drift. They're more likely to come out and dart at something and grab something a little more worthwhile. So keep that in mind too. And that brings me to the 3 different types of trout lies, is what they're called. Again, they're just holding spots. They can be this, they're called trout lies in fly fishing, but you know, they're just holding spots for fish pretty much. You have a shelter lie, a feeding lie, and a prime lie. And I'll show you pretty much here. Let's see, let's find something. This would be a perfect example of a shelter lie. Okay, you have this rock right here underneath the water, has a ledge that goes underneath of it. All this is providing right here is shelter. It's not providing a good opportunity to come out and grab food anywhere. Now a feeding lie would be somewhere like, again, right here, where this current's moving pretty fast through here. There's no shelter, but they would just be sitting here lying in wait for food to come wash down. Okay, so you have a shelter lie where they're just using it as a place to hide and rest. You have a feeding lie where it's not really perfect for them. There's no shelter, but it's going to be a spot where they can feed. And then you have a prime lie. And the prime lie is going to be somewhere where the two are mixed, where they're going to have shelter to get out of that current and stay away from predators, and where they can also feed. And a perfect example of that prime lie is going to be this log jam. They can get up under there, to get up all in there. That has nice current on both sides, drifting down into it. It's got depth to it underneath of it. They can sit in there and wait for food to wash in, and they don't have to worry about predators getting them. They can escape from the current, so they don't have to expend a lot of energy. That's a perfect example of a prime lie. You know, it's not just log jams. You're looking for boulders, big islands like this. Anywhere the water pulls up and gets calm around fast-moving water, that's where those fish are going to be generally holding. That's a prime lie. If they have shelter and they have easy access to food, that's a prime lie. And that can be with anything. No matter that big pillar, if the logs weren't there, that would be creating something with shelter and where food's washing by. You know, you need depth, you need shelter, and you need food. If you have those 3 things, you have a prime lie. You have a perfect spot where fish are going to be holding, in other words. Just another side note, in a stream you have the water column, which is broke down into 3 parts. If you're underneath, picture yourself looking upstream like we are right now. If you're underneath, it's kind of like a U. It gets deep in the middle, and on the sides it goes up. So the top surface layer is called the surface, obviously. Then when you get into the middle, you have the center layer of the column. And then on the bottom is called the stream bed. Now, why that's important is because you have the middle of the water column, the center, is going to be the most brisk, fast-moving spot. And no matter if it's really, really fast or just a little bit fast, it's always going to be moving faster than the stream bed below it, and then faster than the surface above it. And the reason being is the water, the surface level has friction because of the wind. It's going to cause that water to slow down a little more. The stream bed has the same thing. It's banging on rocks, it's bumping off the gravel. It has that friction, so it's going to be slower. A lot of the times fish will hang at that slower moving water at the very bottom on the stream bed. Not very often will they be at the top because of predators, you know, at the surface, because they're easily seen. But most of the time they're going to be below that center water column to where that friction stops kicking up turbulence from the bottom, and it gives them a little resting spot. And a trout can just drop its bottom jaw and hold there in place, and then they just use their fins to move up, down, left, or right. So they don't need to expend a lot of energy, even in fast-moving current like that, if they can find those little turbulent spots or get below those little turbulent spots at the bottom of a stream. Okay, so now let's break down the 4 ways that a stream moves, I guess you could say. You're gonna have pools, runs, riffles, and glides. Okay, so a perfect example right here in front of me. To my left, I have a glide. To my right, I have a run. And I'll explain the 2, and then we'll move up and look at riffles and pools. Keep in mind, you have big versions of these four and mini versions of these four. So I call them minis and mains. If you have a main glide, let's say, well, okay, let's go over here to the actual glide itself. This is a glide where the stream is moving. It's drifting from up to down, and the water is moving very, very slow. Generally, you're not gonna find a lot of fish in here. Reason being, why would they choose this, a place with no shelter and lack of food, over somewhere like over there or down there with more food and more shelter? That's not to say that you'll never catch a fish in a glide. Most of the time in glides, the fish are a lot more wary because they can see you from a lot farther. You know, in here, you can see the bottom pretty much everywhere, which means that they can see you too. Whereas over there, you can only see the bottom in about 1/4 of the entire area. So when you fish glides, if you see fish in them, generally they're gonna be cruising around. They're not gonna be stuck in one spot or sitting in one spot, because they don't need that holding point or that, you know, escape point, that current break. They don't need any of that. The whole thing is one pretty much. So the only thing they don't have is a shelter. So if they are in it, they're gonna be swimming around, cruising. They're not gonna be holding. So you wanna fish it from a distance again because they can see you. So, but generally obviously it's my least favorite spot to fish out of the four, because generally there's not really ever fish in them. Sometimes though, you'll, you know, have that rare occasion. So again, in short, a glide is just long, flat water, doesn't have a lot of current running through it, and that's that. Generally above or below will be the, you know, faster moving water. And again, this right here would be considered a mini glide because it's a very small section of the stream that is, you know, affected by it. Sometimes an entire stream will be a glide, or, you know, a couple thousand feet or 1,000 yards of a stream even will be just one big glide. So you have, like I said, minis and mains. Everything I'm going to be showing you today is pretty much mini, because when you put it in perspective, anytime it's a main, the whole stream is going to be one of the four. You know, the whole section of stream. This entire stream, none of this is one or the other. I mean, you have so many switches. It goes from riffles to run to glide to pool, all within about, you know, I don't know, 100 yards, if that. There's no big long section where it's just steadily one or the other. Right here, we have a run. It's a fairly deep section of water where the water is moving through very swiftly, but it's very narrow most of the time, like this. You know, you only have about a 10-foot spot where that water is moving real swift down through here. And generally, fish, this is where you're gonna, where those fish, where I said the trout are gonna find that turbulent spot at the bottom, and they're gonna lock their jaw to that bottom, and then they're just gonna sit there. If they can find those little current breaks down beneath that turbulence in the stream bed of the water column. Now, if you have something like right here, I don't know if you guys can see it, but there's a big boulder in the water right there. They'll sit behind that, to the left of it, to the right of it, wherever that current break is created from that boulder is where they're gonna sit. So right here would be a really good spot to throw my bait and let it drift and try to present it around that boulder, because generally that's where they're gonna be holding, especially when you have one isolated spot like that. You know, if you have a whole bunch of structure on the bottom, you kind of got to pick apart each one, and you don't really know where they're most likely to be holding. But if you only have one piece of big structure like this, most likely those trout or those fish are going to be right behind it. So with runs, you're going to go back to the food versus energy thing. You have the fast moving water that they're going to be holding in, because that's where they're going to have their most safety. And then on the edge of that, you have a little bit of calm water. So you like to drift your bait down through where that, right on the edge of the calm and the fast. If there's no big structure to target or any little mini pools, a lot of the time you'll get on the edge over near the bank, you'll get like a little indent with a little, where it pulls up a little bit, and then you'll, you know, target those edges. But for the most part, you want to either target the main current bed, the main stream bed, where that water is going to be calm at the bottom, or you're going to target the very edges close to where the water is moving slowly, or any pieces of structure. And that's runs. So now let's move up to riffles. Okay, riffles is what you see up there. It's that little bit of white water. It's deep enough to hold the trout, and they kind of sit in it. Riffles are harder to fish because it's kind of swift moving water over a shallow, so it's going to be over mostly like little rocks and little round rocks and stuff. It's going to be swift water moving over probably a foot deep of water. But the trout love to sit in that because it's considered a prime lie. They have food and they have enough shelter. There's not a lot of vision from above, because the water is so turbulent on the top. It's the surface is disturbed, so it works to your benefit because they can't really see you, but you can't really see them either because the water's not really running smooth. So when fishing a riffle, you're going to pick it apart very thoroughly. You're going to create imaginary lanes in it, and you're going to pick it apart section by section. So just box it off maybe in like 10 boxes and just pick each section apart. Fish each section thoroughly. Let you know, drift it in lanes. You know, if you're fishing it parallel like this, that riffle's up there, you're fishing it from the side casting in, you're going to have 1 lane, 2 lane, 3 lanes, working the lanes out and away from you, and you're going to fish the closest to the farthest. Because if you fish the farthest, you're going to pull, and you catch one, you're going to pull that fish through all the rest of the fish and spook them. So fish the closest lane first, and then farther and then farther and farther till you get to the other side. Any water that's a foot or deeper is going to be good for fishing. Anything less than a foot when it comes to streaming is not going to be so good, because the water is going to be clear and the water is going to be not moving as fast, which means that the fish that are going to be in it are more susceptible to predators. Which reminds me, when I was talking about the glides earlier, they don't have to be shallow like the one I showed you guys. That generally, a glide like I showed you, the one that's right back here, a shallow glide like that, that's dead water. Dead water is water that's not going to be productive. It's going to have no fish in it, most likely. You can have a deep glide, and those deep glides generally will hold some fish too at the very bottom. So I forgot to note on that end of it that, you know, glides can be productive, especially when you have depth to the water. But if you don't have depth, generally they're not productive. But anyway, back to the riffles. Right here in front of me is like a mini kind of riffle. You have this fast moving water over through these shallow rocks right here, but obviously that's not really going to be a spot where there's any fish because you don't have a foot of water. So again, you're looking for depth and structure. Now from this you have riffles, and then it kind of turns into a little mini run, and then it pulls up right here, and then it turns into your faster, bigger, not quite a main run, but definitely a bigger run. And you don't really need to focus on main or mini. Pretty much just focus on if it's a riffle, a run, a pull, or a glide. It really doesn't matter if it's main or mini. It's just a way to define it, so that way we don't confuse anybody. But right here would be considered a prime lie. You have riffles, and that dumps in where you have some swift water right here, which is a run that I'm standing in, and then it pulls up right here where this current break, where now behind that, those rocks right there, it causes a current break, and you have nice calm water right here, right on the edge of the fast moving water. So what you would want to do is you would want to cast into that fast moving water and let it drift just on the edge where that fast moving water is, or on that side with on the edge. And those fish are generally going to be holding right in that calm spot right there, right in between on the edges of either of those sides. And then if you don't get anything in there, you can let it drift right down through that run. And that's perfect. It's 100% prime lie. Now you have also isolated spots, which are just current. They're just called a current break. You have just one random isolated spot. You'll have a lot of fast moving water like that. And it's not quite a pool. It's not quite big enough to be a pool. So it's just a current break. It's just a little current break. It's like a little mini pool right there behind that rock, where the water is moving fast on that side, fast on this side, and then right in there. If those spots are a foot or deeper, those can be amazing for trout and other species, but mainly trout. A lot of people pass stuff like that up and think it's just a small little spot, but I've caught more trout out of little current breaks like that than I have out of the big deep pools like this. So definitely keep that in mind. But anyway, now that we're on pools, that's pretty much where we conclude this. So in a pool, you're going to have the head of the pool, the deep point of the pool, and the tail of the pool. So pretty much your head of the pool is going to be right up here where that fast moving water is dipping in, and then it starts to get slack right at the edge of that water where it's starting to get calm and slack. That's the head of the pool. Now your deep point is going to be the calmest part and the very deepest part right there. And then the tail of the pool is going to be right down here where it starts going from calm to fast and starts picking up into that run. So whether it goes from riffles to pool to more riffles, or riffles to pool or run, it doesn't matter what order they go in. It's just when that water starts moving, goes from moving fast to slow, then stays slow, then from moving slow to fast. Moving fast to slow is your head. Where it stays slow, that's your deep point. And where it goes from slow to fast, that's your tail. Right on the edges of those are always good spots for trout to hold too. And then lastly, when it comes to pools, you have the tongue of water. Around that tongue of water is going to be amazing. So if you look here, let me get closer for you, because this is a little hard to see from far. Okay, if you look here, you have the water moving in. You have kind of like a current right here in front of me, a current on the outer edge over there, and then right in the middle, you have that current dipping into, and it stops right about there, the end, where that fast moving water turns into the slack water. That's called a tongue, where that tongue shoots out into the middle of the pool. At the end of that tongue and all around that tongue, fish are gonna hold, because they're in that, you know, you have kind of like a W right here. If you can see, boom, boom. There's two spots that go around the pool, and then that tongue that goes right in the middle. Every pool is not like that, but when you have a tongue that shoots into a pool like that, that's always going to be a good target point for casting, because that's where fish are going to hold. The only other thing that I could say about this would be up there by that dam, you're going to have a lot of turbulence. You're going to have a lot of water moving and kicking up. It's going to create all kinds of different sections as far as runs and pools, and no riffles, because generally it's going to be deeper. But you're going to have pools, different pools and runs everywhere based on whatever that water is doing up there. And again, you're going to have those big foam spots that I was talking about. We said foam is home. That's where those trout like to make home, because it's underneath of that structure. Well, it's not, you know, foam isn't really structure, but it creates that feeling of structure for them and safety. So yeah, hope you guys learned something. Hope this will be more productive for you guys to, you know, catch some fish, learn how to restream, not just trout, but anything. Glenny's up there. Mr. TRK looks like he has one trout on his stringer. So I'm gonna get to fishing, and tune in next week for the continuation of this video, because I've been talking this whole time. My wax worm's just sitting there. I'm not even fishing. Let's get into a catch and cook video, guys. Let's do it. We will see you next time on Obsession Outdoors. Next week, same spot. Let's go.